There are 6 Australian-built cars from 1930 to 1960 that nobody in the collector market actually wants to buy right now. Not dealers, not restorers, not even the blokes who claim they love old iron. Some owners are finding out their car is worth less than what they spent on the last restoration. We are talking about losses of $5,000, $10,000, in some cases $15,000, on cars that were sold as tough, homegrown Australian machines built for our roads and our conditions. Most of them had no idea this was coming. If you own one of these cars or you are thinking about buying one, watch this before you make any decisions, because the people who got hurt did not do anything wrong. They just did not have this information in time. These are the 6 Australian-built cars from 1930 to 1960 you need to know about right now. We are going hardest first. Number 6. 1934 to 1940 Australian. 6A6. The Australian 6 was built by the Australian Motorists Petrol Company in Melbourne. It was designed specifically for Australian road conditions at a time when imported British and American cars were considered too delicate for the outback. The people who built it believed they were creating something genuinely superior to anything coming off a foreign production line. The used market in 2025 and 2026 has returned a clear verdict on that belief. Fewer than 60 complete Australian 6 examples are known to exist across the entire country. You would think scarcity would mean value. In most collector markets, it does. The Australian 6 is the exception that breaks that rule, and the reason is a combination of factors that all point in the same direction. Mechanical parts are not scarce. They are essentially non-existent through normal channels. The engine shared components with several overseas suppliers who no longer manufacture those lines. When an Australian 6 needs a rebuild, you are not calling a parts supplier. You are calling a machinist and commissioning bespoke work at bespoke prices. Engine rebuilds on documented examples have been running between $18,000 and $26,000 at specialist workshops in Melbourne and Adelaide. That figure does not include bodywork. It does not include interior restoration. It is the engine alone. The buyer pool for a car this specific is not just small, it is almost invisible. Private sale listings on Australian collector platforms show Australian 6 examples sitting for 12 to 18 months without a serious inquiry. Dealers who specialize in pre-war Australian machinery have been declining consignments, citing the same reason consistently: there is no exit on the other side. If you own an Australian 6 and you have been waiting for the right moment to sell, the data suggests the right moment was several years ago. The trajectory on pre-war domestic marques with no parts supply and no broad collector base is not recovering. Number 5. 1935 to 1938 Truscott motor bodies. Special. The Ruskin was built in Footscray, Victoria. It was an attempt to create an Australian sports body on a modified American running gear, a genuine local interpretation of what a performance car could look like on Australian terms. The craftsmen who built them were skilled. The concept was ahead of its time. The 2026 collector market does not care about either of those things. What the market cares about is documentation, provenance, and parts. The Ruskin has problems with all three. Factory records from the Footscray facility were not comprehensively preserved. This means that for most surviving Ruskin examples, establishing authentic build provenance requires specialist historical research that costs money and does not always produce a definitive answer. Buyers at the serious end of the Australian collector market, the buyers who write checks for $30,000 and above, want documentation they can hold in their hands. Incomplete provenance on a Ruskin does not kill the sale, it kills the price. Insurance is the second structural problem. Agreed value policies on low documentation. Pre-war vehicles from domestic manufacturers have become significantly harder to place since 2023. 2. Major Australian classic car insurers reviewed their underwriting criteria for pre-1940 vehicles without complete factory records in late 2024. The result is that some Ruskin owners are now carrying market value policies on cars, where the market value is genuinely uncertain, which means in the event of a total loss, the payout negotiation starts from a very weak position. The restoration economics compound everything. A Ruskin body in original but deteriorated condition requires panel skills that fewer than a dozen active craftsmen in Australia currently possess. Wait times at those workshops are running at 18 months to 2 years. The hourly rates reflect the scarcity of the skill. A comprehensive body restoration on a Ruskin has been quoted at figures that exceed the finished car's reasonable auction estimate by 30 to 40%. That is the definition of a restoration trap. You spend more than the car will ever return, and at the end of it, you still have a car with a thin buyer pool and a documentation problem. Number 4. 1946 to 1949, Bantam Australian-bodied Willys. After the Second World War, several Australian coach builders fitted local bodies to imported American running gear as a stopgap before full domestic production could resume. The Australian-bodied Willys sold in some markets as the Bantam represents this era. It is not a pure American import. It is not a purpose-designed Australian car. It sits in a category that the collector market has never quite known what to do with. That ambiguity is now showing up in auction results. Hybrid vehicles, cars that combine imported mechanical components with Australian coachwork, occupy an uncomfortable middle ground. American collectors are not interested because the body is not authentic to the U.S. market. Australian collectors focused on domestic history are not fully engaged because the drivetrain was never made here. The car ends up competing for a buyer who does not really exist in large numbers. Auction results from Shannon's and Lloyd's between 2022 and 2025 show Australian-bodied Willys examples consistently achieving prices in the $8,000 to $14,000 range, regardless of condition. A well-presented example and a tired example are fetching similar numbers because the buyer pool at any price above $15,000 is essentially empty. The post-war Australian coach building story is genuinely important history. The market has simply not found a way to price that importance above what a general buyer will pay for a car they can actually use and enjoy. Number 3. 1952-1953. Holden 502-106 Utility FX Ute. The FX Holden Ute is an icon. That word gets used carelessly in Australian car culture, but in this case, it is accurate. The Holden Ute, as a concept, a car-based utility built for working Australians, began here. And the FX version is the origin point of that entire lineage. The problem is not the car. The problem is what icon status does to a market when supply increases faster than the buyer pool grows. Between 2018 and 2022, FX Ute values climbed steadily as the generation that grew up with these vehicles reached peak collecting age and disposable income. The market absorbed that demand. What it is now absorbing is the supply created when that same generation begins to age out of active collecting, and estates begin releasing vehicles that have been held for decades. Estate sales of FX Utes in Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria have added inventory to the market at a rate that private buyer demand is not keeping pace with. The result is not a collapse. It is a plateau with a slight downward tilt that is expected to continue as more estate vehicles enter the market through 2026 and 2027. Structural rust is the practical issue that sits behind the value discussion. The FX Ute cab and tray floor were not built with the corrosion protection standards that came later. Examples that spent working lives in coastal Queensland or tropical conditions carry rust in locations' firewall sections, cab corner joints, tray mounting points that are expensive to address properly and easy to hide temporarily with filler and fresh paint. Pre-purchase inspection by a specialist with experience in pre-war and early lure. Holden construction is not optional on these vehicles. It is the difference between buying a solid car at a fair price and buying someone else's hidden problem at a price that felt fair until you got it home. Number 2, 1955 to 1960, Holden FJ Panel Van. The FJ Panel van is where the nostalgia premium and the practical reality of ownership are furthest apart, and where the gap is costing buyers the most money right now. The FJ Panel van has appeared in enough Australian films, television series, and cultural references that its image carries emotional weight well beyond the actual collector community. That cultural visibility has historically supported its price. But cultural visibility and collector demand are not the same thing, and in 2025 and 2026, they are diverging. Insurance groups for FJ Panel vans have been re-rated by 2 of the 3 major Australian classic vehicle insurers following a pattern of high-value claims on vehicles that were insured at agreed values set during the 2019 to 2022 peak. Current agreed value policies are being offered at figures 15 to 20% below what owners paid, or what they believe their vehicle is worth. That gap is not an administrative inconvenience. It is a signal about where the insurer's own valuation data says the market is heading. Mechanical complexity is the second issue. The FJ panel van's B-body carries the same basic running gear as the sedan, but the panel configuration creates access problems for routine maintenance that do not exist on the more common body styles. Independent mechanics, unfamiliar with the layout, quote accordingly, and main dealers with FJ experience are concentrated in metropolitan areas. For country Victoria and regional New South Wales owners, the nearest competent workshop may be a significant distance away. And the buyer pool for panel vans, specifically versus sedans and utes, has always been thinner. The same money buys a better documented, better supported, more liquid FJ sedan. That comparison is exactly what used buyers are making, and the panel van is losing it. Number 1. 1948 to 1956 Holden FX Sedan. The biggest loss, this is where the real money disappears. And this is the car that will surprise the most people watching this video, because the FX Holden sedan is supposed to be the safe choice. It is supposed to be the one with the established collector base, the available parts, the cultural weight, and the dealer network that understands it. All of those things are true. The problem is that they have been true for 30 years, and the market has fully priced all of them in, and then some. The FX sedan was bought heavily between 2015 and 2022 by a specific buyer profile. Australian men in their late 50s and 60s, purchasing the car their father or grandfather drove, paying prices that reflected peak emotional demand. Those buyers are now the sellers, and the buyers coming behind them, the generation that would need to sustain and grow those values, are not engaging with 1940s Australian sedans in the numbers required. Auction data from the last 18 months is consistent. Unrestored FX sedans are clearing at $12,000 to $18,000. Restored examples with documented work are achieving $22,000 to $30,000, but the total restoration spend required to bring a tired example to a genuinely presentable standard. Full mechanical rebuild, rust remediation, panel and paint. Interior is regularly running between $35,000 and $55,000 at reputable shops. The numbers do not work. A $50,000 restoration producing a $30,000 car is not an investment. It is a very expensive lesson in the difference between a car you love and a car the market rewards. The buyers who got hurt by the FX sedan made the same decision as buyers hurt by every car on this list. They paid a premium for history and emotion that the used market does not reflect in cash.